Corrupting the Image by Douglas Hamp. Copyright 2011. All rights reserved. Chapter 10. Modern Discoveries of Giants. We have seen that the Bible clearly teaches that the union of demons and women produced a race of hybrids known as the Nephilim, who were on the earth before the flood and afterward. We've also seen that all ancient Jewish and ante-Nicene Christian literature that spoke of the days of Noah unanimously agreed that demons mingled their seed with women and produced the hybrid race known as the Nephilim. We should expect to find, therefore, some archaeological evidence of the Nephilim. In addition to the many written modern accounts of explorers and miners discovering men of extremely large proportions, there are also some archaeological findings. However, in our day, seeing is not always believing because computer programs like Photoshop can make the unreal look very convincing. Unfortunately, there are many photos floating around the internet that are hoaxes that look fairly authentic. Thus, our challenge, short of going out there and digging the things ourselves, is to sort through what is legitimate evidence and what is not. In this evidence, I have with care selected photos taken before the advent of the computer and news reports from actual newspapers, all of which come from sources which can be verified for the skeptical reader. While the thesis of this book does not stand or fall on such evidence, it is important to help us see that there were giants in those days and afterwards, always keeping in mind that Jesus said that his coming would be like the days of Noah. The Irish Giant. One way to test the genuineness of pictorial evidence is to find such pictures that were taken before the invention of the computer and Photoshop. That is not to say that the object in the picture is necessarily real, but the photograph itself is not something that has been created or altered with the aid of a computer. One such example is brought to us by W.G. Wood Martin, who in 1901 wrote of the Irish pre-Christian traditions in his book Traces of the Elder Faiths of Ireland, a Folklore Sketch, Volume 1. In his book, he includes both textual and photographic evidence of giants. The text is intriguing and corroborates what we have been investigating on giants. Wood Martin quotes Auguste from his chapter on the lives and size of the antediluvians, De Civitate Dei 15:9. He writes, concerning the magnitude of their bodies, the graves laid bare by age or the force of rivers and various accidents, especially convict the incredulous where they have come to light, or where the bones of the dead of incredible magnitude have fallen. I have seen, and not I alone, on the shore of Utica, so huge a molar tooth of a man that were it cut up into small models of teeth like ours, it would seem enough to make 100 of them. But this, I should think, had belonged to some giant, for beside that the bodies of all men were then much larger than ours, the giants again far exceeding the rest. Kirby, in his wonderful and eccentric museum, published in 1820, devotes a chapter to a description of gigantic remains and states that all the public prints make mention of an extraordinary monument of gigantic Inhuman statue found by two laborers of Leixlip churchyard on the 10th July, 1812. It appeared to have belonged to a man of not less than 10 feet in height, and is believed to be the same mentioned by Keating Phelim O'Toole, buried in Leixlip churchyard near the Salmon Leap, 1,250 years ago. In the place was found a large finger ring of pure gold. There were no inscriptions or characters of any kind upon it. One of the teeth is said to have been as large as an extraordinary forefinger. Wood Martin then includes a story and photograph taken from Strand Magazine, December 1895 edition, and he says to let the reader judge as to the genuineness of the fossilized Irish giant, which is thus described. Preeminent among the most extraordinary articles ever held by a railway company is a fossilized Irish giant, which is at this moment lying in the London and North Western Railway Company's Broad Street Goods Depot, and a photograph of which is reproduced here. This monstrous figure is reputed to have been dug up by a Mr. Dyer while prospecting for iron ore in County Antrim. The principal measurements are entire length 12 feet 2 inches, girth of chest 6 feet 6 inches, and arms, length of arms 4 feet 6 inches. There are 6 toes on the right foot. The gross weight is 2 tons 15 cwt, so that it took half a dozen men and a powerful crane to place this article of lost property in position for the Strand Magazine artist. Strand Magazine, December 1895, C.F. Wood Martin, 1901, 58. Just how much is 2 tons 15 CWT? Due to the fact that this artifact was measured in England, we must use the imperial British units of measurement. The iron ton, known as the long ton, is equal to 2,240 pounds, whereas the American ton is 2,000 pounds. The centrum weight, abbreviated CWT, is equal to 112 pounds. Thus, the total weight of 2 long tons is 4,480 pounds, and 15 CWT is 1,680. The entire weight in pounds, therefore, is 6,160. Of course, the man in the coffin did not weigh that much when alive, and the fossilization process added to the overall weight. Nevertheless, the Antrim Giant corroborates what King Og of Bashan must have been like. If we return to the original calculation, first made by Galileo, then measuring twice the height of today's man, or of 6 feet and optimal weight of 200 pounds, the Antrim Giant ought to have had a net weight of 1,600 pounds. Not only was the Irish Giant also 2 feet taller than Goliath, but he also had 6 toes on the right foot, just like the Rephaim, which were counted among the Nephilim. Yet again there was war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, with 24 fingers and toes, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot. And he also was born to the giant Rephaim. Septuagint reads Gigantes. 1 Chronicles 20, verse 6. The fossilized Irish giant is by no means the only evidence. There are many reports, written and archaeological, that attest to the fact that giants were real. Like the evidence of the Irish giant, I have sought out evidence that is not subject to Photoshop types of tricks. Petrified foot more than 2 feet long. A news report from the Chillicothe Weekly Constitution in 1917 also speaks of an enormous foot that was found in a coal mine in Iowa. A petrified foot more than 2 feet long was found in a coal mine near Lehi by miners at Fort Dodge, Iowa. It is perfectly formed and weighs more than 30 pounds. The foot was dislodged by the miners at the 90-foot level of the mine. The owner of the foot was probably about 13 feet tall. The formula is 6.6 inches in height for every inch of length of the foot. New York Tribune, prehistoric giant. According to the New York Tribune, February 3, 1909, a 15-foot human skeleton tall was unearthed in Mexico. We recall that King Og of Bashan was that tall, and he was reported to be of the Nephilim. News was received here Monday from Mexico that at Ixtapalapa, a town 10 miles southeast of Mexico City, there had been discovered what was believed to be the skeleton of a prehistoric giant of extraordinary size. A peon, while excavating for the foundation of a house of the estate of Augustin Juarez, found the skeleton of a human being that is estimated to have been about 15 feet high, and who must have lived ages ago, judging from the ossified state of the bones. Romulo Luna, judge of the district, has taken possession of the skeleton, which is complete, with the exception of the skull. Judge Luna says that as soon as the search for the skull is finished, the skeleton will be forwarded to the National Museum of Mexico, which has an almost priceless collection of Aztec antiquities. The National Museum, it is said, has made arrangements to investigate this find. The discovery of the skeleton has revived the old Aztec legend that in a prehistoric age a race of giants lived in the valley of Anahuac, a name given by the Aboriginal Mexicans to that part of the Mexican plateau, nearly corresponding to the modern valley of Mexico City. These giants, known as Quinatzins, the story goes, were afterward destroyed by the Olmecas, also of great stature, who in turn perished by earthquake, interpreted as an expression of the wrath of God. Giants of historic France. The Olwyn Register on November 8, 1894, reported that scientists confirmed the find of a race of giants between 10 and 15 feet tall. In a prehistoric cemetery recently uncovered at Montpellier, France, while workmen were excavating a waterworks reservoir, human skulls were found measuring 28, 31, and 32 inches in circumference. The bones that the workmen discovered were also of gigantic proportions. The discoveries were sent to the Paris Academy for study. One of the scientists engaged in examining the skeletons says that they belonged to a race of men who stood between 10 and 15 feet in height. Strange find by miners of Apollo mine. Appearing in the newspaper Charleroi Mail, July 1909 edition, was a news report of a petrified giant whom the finders considered to be absolutely human. The problem is that according to evolution, no human should be found at such a depth, as it would indicate that the person to be millions of years old. According to the Bible, there were giants on the earth before the days of the flood, and hence, finding a giant so far below the ground only serves to confirm the veracity of the Bible and the flood. 75 feet below the surface, petrified human head and shoulders discovered. No doubt about it being human remains. Museums making inquiries. Specimen is very hard. End quote. Conclusion. The evidence we have seen in this section confirms what the Bible has said. Given that there are so many fake pictures out on the internet, it seemed prudent to look for sources that predate things like Photoshop. Therefore, we found sources that are copies of old newspapers, including testimony and sometimes pictures of strange finds. All of the sources are given for the inquisitive reader to verify the details. Therefore, the conclusion that we have arrived at is that there have been extraordinarily large men in the past. Some were found at a great depth under the earth, which only serves to confirm that they were buried during a great cataclysm that came upon the earth, which obviously was the flood in the days of Noah. Summary of Part 2, Satan's Failed First Attempt. Let's recap what we have seen concerning the days of Noah. First, we have seen that men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and there were conceivably over 10 billion people at the time. We investigated, and without reservation, concluded that the sons of God were fallen angels. They were the same fallen angels that Jude and Peter spoke about that are kept in chains of darkness reserved for judgment. They came to the daughters of Adam, and from their union were born Nephilim, which consisted of human demonic genetic material. The Nephilim, fallen ones, were known as Gegonis of the earth in Greek. These were the famous men of the ancient world. The Gegonis in the Greek traditions were hybrid creatures, half human and half god, demonic. We also saw that all of the ancient Jewish traditions believed the Nephilim to be hybrids, half human and half demonic. The ancient Christians believed in like manner. The idea that the sons of God were the sons of Seth does not even come about until Augustine. We discovered that Augustine simply asserted that the sons of God were the sons of Seth, but he in no way had any supporting evidence or scripture to back up his claim. As such, he declared it to be true, and since then Bible commentators have repeated his words without offering any more evidence than he did. We have shown that the sons of God were not the sons of Seth, but were in fact fallen angels, and the daughters of Adam, men, were not the daughters of Cain, but were simply women, or, as the writer of Genesis already put, they were the descendants of Adam. Thus the contrast is between direct creations of God, which the angels were, and the sons of Seth were not, and between female humans, which were procreations via Adam. With this backdrop do we read that God was grieved by the wickedness of man. Indeed, given that women were having offspring which were half demonic, how could God not be sorry that he had created man? Without doubt, we have seen that fallen angels mingled their seed genetic information with humans both before and after the days of Noah. More fallen angels did it again. It is this genetic mixing that makes God's complete destruction of every man, woman, and child in Noah's day reasonable. Without question, the Bible says that man's thoughts were constantly wicked, and the first 4 verses of Genesis 6 provide the answer to the question of how they became so wicked. The Nephilim, who had demonic fathers, were on the earth in those days. It seems incredible, but considering that out of the billions of humans, see chapter 5, on the earth, only 8 were saved out of it. A major reason for the flood seems to be that many of the human race had been tainted genetically. The Bible tells us that Noah was a just man, tzaddik, perfect, tamim, in all his generations, Genesis 6:9, meaning that he was without genetic defect. Consider that of the 80-some times tamim is used in the Bible, it always refers to an animal without any physical blemish. Thus, it would also explain why the Israelites were to destroy the people of the land, every man, woman, and child. That is, they were all tainted because they were Nephilim. Whether or not all but Noah's family were Nephilim is uncertain. However, the strong implication is that many, perhaps a majority, were. When the children of Israel saw the Nephilim, they lost heart and did not trust that God could overcome the Nephilim. Among the Nephilim they had to fight was King Og of Bashan, whom we have seen measured about 15 feet tall. He also weighed approximately 3,100 pounds and needed a minimum of about 22,000 calories just to get through each day. Judging from his stature, Canaan was indeed a land that devoured its inhabitants. Lastly, we looked for evidence of such enormous people and found that as recently as 100 or 200 years ago, giant mummies, footprints, and accounts all gave witness to the reality of such unnaturally enormous beings. With the thought in mind that the inhabitants of the land were Nephilim, we can understand why God commanded the Israelites to completely exterminate those 7 nations. The genetic mingling of demonic and human could not be tolerated. It was not tolerated in the days of Noah, and for that reason God commanded the extermination of the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. Everything was to reproduce according to its kind, Genesis 1:24, and the demons clearly broke this commandment. The book of Daniel prophesies that the mingling of demons with humanity will happen once again, and Jesus himself stated that as the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man shall be. All hearing those words would have associated the destruction of the world with the Nephilim. If the sons of God were mingling with the human race in Noah's day, then that means that the last days will be marked by a similar occurrence. God gave the human race 120 years until the flood he would bring to destroy the world. During this final time of 120 years until the flood, the mingling continued, married and given in marriage, until the very last day when Noah entered the ark and God closed the door. If we are truly in the last days of time, then we ought to see biblical proof that evidence similar to Noah's will repeat. We ought to see the following: demons materializing physically in some manner, the taking of women, demonic human hybrids. Do we see any of these things happening in our day? Predictably, all of these things are happening, and these are what we will examine in the next section.